Okay, hold on. Let me get this, share my screen real quick. Ready? Little patience. Um, can you guys see it or not? No.
Not yet, or at least I
Okay.
can't.
Let me try to get that way.
Here it comes.
Okay. Cool. Thanks. Let me know when you want me to start. Are you guys ready?
You can start when you're ready.
Oh, goodness. Maybe I'm not ready. Okay. Um, hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here, and Giovanni and I are excited that you're here. Um, our presentation is about developing the counselor's voice through authentic expression. As most of you know, my name is Susie, and this is Giovanni.
Hey,
Um,
how's it going?
the presentation will focus on like past and current professional skills, kind of interests and experiences that we can merge into our present paradigm of developing and expanding on our holistic counselor identity. So throughout the presentation, we're going to kind of be reading poetry and showing photographic imagery as an expression of our authentic voice through the program as parts of our individual narratives. So,
Narratives at work, the liminal crossroads, the afterthought of experiencing, hesitating, refraining from reframing. They sing, let it be, or what is done is done. They advise, leave it behind. You claim those were the great narratives. Today, the spontaneous rhyme, as if the works of yesterday align, invigorate the present tense. The ink sinks in like the fisherman's net.
it's about capturing the moments of the here and now. So we want to kind of take a minute before we get too into this and kind of feel out where you guys are. So we're going to ask a few questions and hopefully you can tell us like where you are in the process of creating your own authentic voice. Perhaps you're all the way through, perhaps you're just beginning. So who here is currently transitioning into a new career? Anybody else? Just Giovanni and I guess.
I'm sure there's plenty of others. Yep.
Okay.
Maddie said she is in the comments.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Awesome.
And Allison.
Thank you. And how did you guys choose counseling as your new career choice? Well, for me, I can say that it was really helpful for me to go into counseling because it's something that being of service to others is really important to me. So that's kind of the biggest kind of reason for my career change. And has anyone completely stopped one career to do another yet?
Susie, this is Allison. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hi, Allison.
Hi. Yeah, I'm leaving 20 years of working in advertising and business. I just, over time realized I cared so much more about building up people than I did building up their businesses. And I decided to make the big leap. So I left my field in May and I'm immersing myself full time and just doing some consulting on the side. So I'm kind of in that liminal space yet, but a huge transition.
Yeah, definitely. That's thank you so much for sharing.
Anybody else?
Um, are you saying like, because I'm not in the counseling career yet, but I will be making a shift because right now I'm a purchasing agent buyer for a mental health, I mean, not mental health, for medical health company. So I actually want to work with kids, so it's going to be a total shift for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Thank you for
Yeah,
sharing
right.
that. Yeah.
So what were your reasons for changing careers? Does anybody have anything on that?
My reason is because my passion is to help kids that going through what I went through as a kid, and I realized after getting my own mental health in some type of order that if I had did this when I was a kid, I would be more functional as an adult. So I want to help kids so they could be functional adults.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful reason.
Mm-hmm.
Switching. Do you guys think, does anybody have any a thing that's blocking them from merging your professional skills, whatever they may be, your interests, your culture experience, etc., with your holistic, like developing your holistic counselor identity?
Can you give examples of what that might look like?
Sure. For me, I'm a photographer, right? I'm a professional photographer, and I am trying to incorporate that into my voice, my authentic voice. But it's really hard for me to share some of my personal work with people. But I think that that's all part of transitioning into this field, because being authentic in who we are is really important to our therapeutic relationship and the client, and giving the client kind of a way of seeing that you truly are there. It's congruent. It's a congruent to the relationship process. Um,
Susie and I often, when we were working together, we talked about the difficulty of being vulnerable, especially when her and I have something that we've been really passionate about, which is the arts. Me writing all my life, and her doing photography all her life, and for me having that always be on the side, but always choosing something else to do. For me, the idea of writing poetry and incorporating that was difficult and kind of became a block, and it keeps me from perhaps being able to be my authentic self in my profession that I am currently going into now.
We also have a cohort of ours. Her name's Jennifer, and she, in her past profession, she was a teacher, and she really didn't really like that profession very much, or she had some issues with it, and she finds herself now using those aspects of her past career, her past profession as a teacher in her counseling practice. And so she said that sometimes she's conflicted about that because she just so wanted to leave that behind, but now she's noticing that that's really coming in handy. So that was really, for me, that was a really big noticing of something that's being blocked because of a conflict or something that you kind of want to leave in the past, but she's noticing that it's quite helpful. Does that kind of give a better example?
Yeah. Can anybody relate to those, to what we just talked about?
I can't, I don't know if I necessarily relate, but I want to thank you for the example.
Oh, sure. Yeah, please feel free to ask any questions throughout the process, and hopefully we can answer everybody's question and kind of help the process along, right?
So one of the things that we wanted to do with incorporating our poetry and into photography, and also our new profession, which are parts of ourselves, obviously, we wanted to find a way of taking these parts that Susie and I are big parts of our lives, and kind of like bringing them together. So it's kind of bringing our authentic selves and parts of ourselves and bringing it into theory and trying to see how that exactly looks like.
And seeing how it looks on this blank canvas that we have here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like starting to put the paint on the canvas and throwing out and see what works, kind of metaphor, really.
Black into blue into purple, the pink dawn, then blood red orange, then yolk yellow, puncturing, saturating the fields to gold. We sit under an acacia tree and watch oxen graze, migrate. He thinks of home. Last night the stars were lanterns in the dark, tertiary narratives.
it's a connection and openness to experiencing life, bringing it all together.
So this idea of career stories, parts of ourselves obviously in the past, and we're looking at it right now from a narrative approach in counseling. And when we think of a narrative approach, we're usually thinking about therapy, and we're thinking about it from the providing that for the client, and we're kind of turning it back and saying, let's look at that, and how does this apply to the counselor? In the narrative approach to counseling, the career story consists of episodes unified by the common theme of the self. The stories of yesterday flow into today. They unwind like abstract lines to fragments which link to create a whole. They consist of an image of a fisherman casting out his net, or a landscape patensonia which crystallizes visual language. Like the poetry and photography in this presentation, these stories open narratives for the self of yesterday and the self of today to walk towards the self of tomorrow to strengthen the career identity. So I guess a question I have for you is, who would you be without your stories? And anybody, if you please come on, join in. We would love for you to participate and be part of this process.
I don't know if this is relevant, but I know that for myself, a lot of my stories of the past have brought me to this moment of wanting to be a counselor, that a lot of who I am as a tied up in the events that have shaped who I am. And that has actually shaped the type of counseling that I want to do. The populations that I look at serving or helping, a lot of that is because of experiences that I've had in my past. I don't know if that's applicable.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's totally applicable, because it's not just your professional story, it's your whole story, right? It's your personal experiences, your interests, and how that all comes together and forms the canvas and creates your authentic voice. There's not one piece of you that doesn't all form this voice. I guess that's the kind of thing that we're trying to gather, is that they're all aspects of yourself, and how we can bring them all together or even recognize them. And that's sometimes the hard part. Would you agree, Giovanni?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. I think that's why it's when we were working on this, one thing that we began to realize is the love of collaboration, and how that in itself is a part of the counseling experience. There's like the arts that Susie and I have. That's also part of the counseling experience that we are bringing in, and that we're trying to bring in and be vulnerable, and also the love for theory and incorporating all those things together to produce what is coming right now, or as I would say, it's kind of like watching theory in motion just develop itself.
So I hope that kind of clarifies things that we're trying to talk about today in this presentation.
So when we were talking about career stories, we're also talking about narratives at work. And in this particular model by Mayhers and Lengel, he often talks about the first story, that many of us may find ourselves stuck in the first story. To a certain degree, we are observers of our own career and observers of our own life. We have dialogues with other people, and we also have self-dialogue with ourselves. When we want to change a particular career, or we feel that we are stuck, we're having, as Meher and Lengel say that we're having a boundary experience. A boundaries experience is an experience whereby an individual encounters the boundaries of his or her existing self-concept and cannot cope with the situation and its boundaries. This means that the person hits a wall and their sense of identity is challenged. Cognitive issues, ruminating and emotions, the person might feel very anxious, depressed, they might feel that there's nothing that they can do to get out of their first narrative, though they want to move towards their second narrative or move from first story to second story. So the person is trapped in their first story, leaving him or her suffering or stuck. In a sense, the person becomes trapped in the fight, flight, or freeze mode characteristic of a first story, unable to move forward. The aim of creativity is to work towards a more empowering perspective or second story. This is when there's a shift in perspective, acceptance, and restructuring of meaning. We deconstruct to reconstruct. We evaluate and reevaluate, or we take inventory. When we talk about moving from first story to second story, there's certain stages, as you see. There's sensing, sifting, focusing, and understanding. I would like to do a case study with you. So for example, Giovanni is a shoe salesman. On the side, Giovanni geeks out to counseling theory by writing poetry about it. Giovanni feels that parts of himself are missing. He is having a boundary experience. Giovanni decides to change his profession. He wants to incorporate his love of poetry and counseling theory. To do so, Giovanni goes through the 4 learning stages. So the first learning stage is sensing. Sensing is sensing is information that is gathered. This information is emotional. Giovanni may feel anxious, frustrated, and trapped in his first story. There is a strong desire to change, but the wall of ruminating feelings is impenetrable. Giovanni next moves to sifting. Sifting is the process of sorting through the impenetrable wall. No longer do emotions overwhelm the cognitive process of Giovanni. The fragments or parts of his first story and second story begin to move towards each other. The same way that we're using poetry and photography here, these pieces of art that we have are kind of moving towards each other to, again, which is to provide a theory emotion of a narrative at work towards an authentic self. The next stage is focusing. Focusing is the crystallizing of viewpoints or aha moments. Though still in fragments, ideas and actions are strung together by thematic feeling and concrete thoughts which arose from the sensing and sifting stage come together. Giovanni is taking action. And then we have understanding. And understanding is having insight and living in his secondary story. So Susie and I, through this PowerPoint, one of the things that we discovered is that despite being vulnerable and being really apprehensive to sometimes put our work out there, it became kind of very refreshing and very eye-opening and in awareness towards the type of counseling that we would like to kind of pursue through the creative process.
It's almost created this connection of an energetic connection. It gets you excited about sharing something of yourself, and in a way that can be helpful, which is really, I think, what all of us, the basis of counseling is all about, is being of service. Creativity in counseling is something that I think it's crucial role that's played in society, and the ability to respond to the mounting complications of everyday modern life. It kind of gives us a personal expression outlet to do something different. Now, Giovanni and I have been talking about creativity in an artistic aspect, but I think that we need to also incorporate creativity as being almost anything. It could be finding a new recipe that you might want to try. It could be incorporating journaling into your therapeutic relationship. It could be finding a different route home that might be more meditative for you. So in a lot of ways, it can also be a creative outlet for self-care in many ways. And I think we as counselors, we learn about integrating creativity into the therapeutic process based on kind of what might be beneficial for the client, but what considerations do we really take for ourselves? And so that's something we just kind of want to look at and maybe see if anybody has thoughts about that. So feel free to give those or not. And another thing that I mentioned in question is like, how do we overcome these self-imposed restrictions that we place on ourselves in order to infuse a more creative way of being, thus giving voice to our authentic selves. For me, it's really important to be who I am. I don't know how to be anybody else, and sometimes that's hard to communicate to people, and sometimes it just comes extremely naturally. So I think that that's something as developing counselors we need to really reflect on. And as a process of counseling in this master's program, we do a lot of self-reflection, and I think I've come such a long way in gaining self-awareness and creativity and what's working for me. And so it's been a great experience to actually take the next step. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. I don't know if you have anything else to add with that, Giovanni.
I would just love to hear what all of you would think about when we think as counselors, we learn about integrating creativity into the therapeutic process based on what might be most beneficial of the client for the client. But what creative considerations do we take for ourselves? Does anybody have anything that you take? Well, I mean, a creative outlet that you have for yourself, and what does that look like?
So you mean like self-care?
Could be self-care. Absolutely. Sure, it could be. I mean, that's definitely an outlet.
So I like to play the piano, and so I think that both of those are great forms of self-care for me, and creativity is infused in it as well.
Yeah, and I know, Jen, just for you, I know that you have a love of animals. So
I was thinking animals. Yeah. I didn't know if that was creative. But.
Yes, well, that's what I mean. It doesn't have to be this idea that we have about creativity. It can be anything that we love and that we're passionate about.
Yeah.
I mean, another example for me is I love going to the gym. I love working out. I love getting that energy out. For me, it's a way of it's been a wonderful way of learning to deal with my stress. And just learning about the different types of exercise that are possible to do is great, and the social events that come with that.
Susie, Giovanni, Desiree she had several comments. Sorry, Desiree, I had missed your comments. But the last one was that she had been doing yoga for 10 years and would love to incorporate yoga into her counseling practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea in so many ways. And I think that's something that is easily passed along to the client, as is forms of exercise, I would think.
And it falls into the thing of parts of ourselves. Because, again, we continue, it's kind of like puzzle pieces that come together to form the whole.
Okay. All right.
So did we answer the last one or no?
We haven't heard from anybody on that, but.
Okay. Anybody have any self-imposed restrictions? Like they don't want somebody to know something about them, or they think it might hinder their way of being in some way? I guess not. I think self-imposed restrictions are, I mean, in themselves, they are difficult to talk about just in general. It requires braving our own wilderness and being able to, as Brene Brown would say, be able to stand in our own wilderness and be okay, or what is that? It's okay. Something about uncomfortable, being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah, definitely. I find sometimes that I'm more uncomfortable being uncomfortable than I am being comfortable, if that makes sense.
Presenting it.
Right now, yeah. I thought somebody else was speaking.
Oh, we have, yes. All right.
I do struggle with that. As far as you guys are saying, just being comfortable with who you are. I tend to struggle a lot with that, especially just knowing that, so many people, And I guess that has a lot to do with caring what people think. But I just see people as being very judgmental and in their reactions and things like that. So I do struggle a lot with that.
Mm.
Yeah, that's really an excellent point because I think we all have some of that, or at least maybe I should just speak for myself. I definitely, struggle with putting myself out there because it's, especially when it's art or something like that, it's so personal, and somebody to judge it or criticize it, it's hard. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hitting the apartment window, below the scene is watercolor. A couple run into a phone booth from the pitter-patter of rain, chewing gum in their mouths. A black pool is reflecting a silent movie, a world so intimate to only they, opening the phone book. He says, this is raw data, touched by the spectrum of color, or a boat inside a raindrop.
It's photography is always about conveying a feeling for me.
The canvas is white as the clouds, shifting like prodigal giants, traveling over the black mountains of Cherokee. What to take, what to leave behind. The pores in our skin are basin jugs. They drink the rain. They spill over when running up the mountain to cool you off. You are the girl. You are the boy. Parts came to whole. You press your back to the earth and inhale.
A way of looking beyond what is being shown, going deeper.
That's an awesome photo, Susie.
Thank you.
I agree, very powerful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Susie, Desiree had another comment.
Oh, sure.
She said perfectionism can be something I struggle with and that sometimes can cause restrictions.
Oh, that's an excellent point. And I think so many people can speak to that. I think,
Right, you and I can definitely speak to that. I think that I've been working on this PowerPoint even while I'm doing this PowerPoint. I'm like, oh man, but it's that perfectionism that it's a double-edged sword, right? Isn't it? It works so well in so many ways, but it's a way it can be certainly it can be a big letdown a lot at the same time. So it's a hard thing to temper.
definitely.
So the challenge is not to shy away from personal expression. Experience, the unfamiliar in nature, is worth theoretical expression. There is a population which does benefit from being willing to go there. This go there is coloring outside the lines, pursuing a hobby or artistic expression, or touching on your own uncomfortableness. And I think that's what Susie and I are doing to a certain degree. We are touching on our own uncomfortableness, but there's something very freeing about it.
Definitely. And I think for me, sometimes it's, oh, go ahead, Char.
No, I was just saying, and you're doing a wonderful job at it. When you give yourself in this type of forum and you go with what you know, there is a part of you that is hesitant as far as to what is the group thinking, what is the crowd thinking, but as far as to you not shying away from what you are as a person are from your personal expression, and willing to go there and color outside those lines and give us this presentation that you have as far as to the photos and the expression, and teaching us as far as to the theoretical process of being who you are. So I do thank you. Thank you both.
Wow. Thank you. That's very kind.
Red to black with smears of rain, you keep me up, I think I will sleep on canvases with oily mustard hexagons and rusty nails. A smegma river snakes through the shredded valley of burnt-out neon signs and splintered lumber, acknowledging our carbon footprints. With each century, it is clear the terrain mutates to us, a self-portrait, as astronauts in fallout suits radiate and rummage.
This is a quote that I kind of always go back to. It helps me really sometimes take a different approach to things. It is a function of art to renew our perception. What we are familiar with, we cease to see. The writer shakes up the familiar scene, and as if by magic we see a new meaning in it. I think that's so prevalent in life and in our counseling practice, because we may go into a situation where we have a belief about something, but if we just shift right or shift right and left and take a different approach to looking at that in a different way, perhaps it's the client's view, or just stepping outside of what our belief system is. I think it's so much more beneficial to ourselves as people, as well as our clients and our future development as counselors. And in keeping with the narratives at work theme, and as well as bringing everything into the process, as Ivy was suggesting about experiences and things, I just kind of wanted to share some of my thoughts that I recognized about myself from my career as a professional photographer, and try to speak to the overlap of my authentic voice as it's developing. The first one is thinking visually. It's just something that I do. I create a storyboard in my head, which is crucial to kind of needs to be, what's noticed, what I want to bring awareness to, how to express either in my photography to make sure I am able to communicate a story without words, or in how I make connections with people, or in establishing what is important to say for a paper or a presentation or a project or a role play in school. So I think there's this, it's something that I really noticed in self-reflection about how I use things in my everyday life that I depended so much on in my career as a photographer. A second strategy I have is it's an observational strategy, because part of my work as a photographer is to notice everything, or especially when I'm photographing an event or something that needs to be captured at that moment. Anticipating, I have to tap into almost like an intuitive knowing of what might be next, and so I can capture the moment that's really going to best magnify that situation. And I think that this is imperative to do the photography process just as it is to the therapeutic relationship, because I think a lot of us have to kind of notice and recognize, from whether it's body language to kind of how somebody might be speaking with us. There's so many different aspects that we can kind of begin to observe and notice. And outside of being a photographer, the aspect of being creative, another thing that I really relished is about the genuine connection with people that I photographed, specifically in portraiture, because putting someone at ease is a huge part of photography. So taking the time to really listen and be congruently there and present really helps lower the protective walls that we all have, especially when people are getting their photo taken. It's like they just go straight up, and you get that fake smile, and nobody's really authentic. So in really listening and talking to someone before you just start taking their image was really a powerful benefit for me. And it kind of started to allow the true reflection of being, and they began to shine through. And this is often the result between a good photo and a great photo. So I think there's this overlap once again of just committed listening as well. And the last, I'm not really one to talk about myself, but another aspect of my photography business was my dogs. They had this amazing gift of empathetic knowing when somebody needed a little more support or acceptance. And they're big dogs, but they would bring you a toy. They'd lean up for more pets and loves. They're quite they were quite big characters, and they were really a great therapeutic tool and something that I would like to incorporate into my life and practice again, hopefully in the future. So this is all easily said and done as far as like talking about myself. It's not easy for me, but I'm trying to really look at the pieces of my authentic self so it's seen more. And this is something that I came upon. It's called the Three Selves model. It's similar to the Johari window. I don't know if anybody went to the presentation yesterday with Dr. Soley and Dr. Foster and Kelly, but it speaks to, that one particularly speaks to the four windows. And this is about the three selves. It's kind of this similar idea where views of a person takes as being in one of these three states. Sometimes they integrate it, other times they're fragmented. And for me, I tend to, like, because I'm a visual, like imagery is a big thing for me. The closed position, I kind of see as a closed door, that somebody's not willing to look at any other way of being. They're always right. It's often attributed to anger, fear, and an absolute system of beliefs for various reasons. This is often, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can also be attributed to a good thing. There's also the absorbent position, which I tend to think of as a revolving door, because it's not just you coming and going. You need people to push you through sometimes. It's often a learned response. I think we get influenced by others oftentimes for low self-esteem or codependency and or a fear of being left out. And then there's the flexible position, and this is you see yourself as all right, and others see you as all right as well. It's an individual in this position suggests a higher level of self-worth based on an interior belief of self-efficacy. So, like I mentioned, all three of these positions have positive aspects that emphasize self-awareness, communication, congruence, and choice-making change possible.
Yeah, and when we're talking about when we're talking about narratives at work, and we're talking about career stories, when you blend these three selves models, we have to be able to be fluent depending on the situation, and oftentimes when we're moving from first story to second story, being able to use these three self models and being able to depending on the situation allows us to just kind of move more into who we are and who we're going to be.
Can I interrupt you both for a minute? You have a couple of comments in the chat. Dr. Rush Wilson said, great pictures of the dog. Sherry said, I think Susie just integrated her artistic gift into counseling in a perfect way, putting the client at ease, listening to what's being said. And then I also want to point out, and you guys may have to go back and read Ivy's comment. She had said this earlier and I missed it. I apologize, Ivy. But she said, I noticed I was sitting here wondering, do I try fixing it again? Do I just leave it, fix it, or leave it? Eye twitching. And so I'm not really sure what that was in reference to, since I missed it when she first wrote it down, but you guys might have to go back and look at that.
Okay. All right. Wow. Thank you for the comments.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think bringing ourselves into the story and self-reflection is just a huge aspect for both of us and for this collaboration. And as hopefully we've kind of started to develop our own creative voice. And so we hope that perhaps you have too.
All right. Yeah, so we're going to do like an inventory exercise. And we would just like to ask you to just kind of, if you feel comfortable, to tell us some of those parts of yourselves that you kind of keep hidden away, that you have been interested in incorporating, that you hope to one day incorporate in that sentence of like, maybe one day, well, one day, well, one day. Do any of you have any of those things that you would like to tell us about? Any passions, any fields of interest, anything that might be difficult to tackle, anything like that?
And maybe it doesn't have to be difficult.
Nicola said, my writing and art, as well as my passion of advocacy.
Mhm.
Right on.
Yep.
That's great.
Allison shared animal assisted therapy.
Mm.
I'm with you, sister.
I was just gonna say animals too. I've been thinking lately, like, how can I incorporate my love for animals into counseling? But definitely something I'd like to look into more.
Yeah, that's something I've been
Mhm.
looking into more too, because it's really, um, uh, and I'm an advocate. I am an animal advocate, so I understand and Nicola's advocacy point
Right.
as well. Yeah.
Anybody else? All right. So Susie,
Does anybody, do you guys have any questions other than
yep. So,
this?
yeah. So we have a question to ask you, actually.
Oh, we have a question for you. Yeah, we do. So what are you
So what are you
waiting
waiting
for?
for? Right?
It's trying to, I guess it's trying to
Yep.
kind of step into the uncomfortableness of everything.
Well, we completed that's our presentation, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask us. We're more than happy to answer them.
Yeah. And just so you guys know, this is like one of my biggest sellers, photo-wise. She is in waiting rooms across the country, hanging in veterinarian's office, and so I just thought it would be a good reference as far as the end of the project goes.
Who wrote the poetry? Was that addressed earlier? Is that yours, Giovanni?
Yeah, that's my poetry. The thing that we did with the poetry and the photography is because we're talking about parts of ourselves. If you go back to the PPT, you'll see that we link the photography with the poetry. And one thing that we began to do, we were kind of thinking about theory and motion. So we were developing these ideas, and we were trying to find, and I think that's where kind of writing after writing after writing and photo after photo after photo, you become very familiar to the editing process to the point that it can be over perfectionism. But in this particular time, because we've practiced so much of that, we found that kind of it made these parts that we had floating in the air kind of slowly come together into what we ended up presenting to you.
Well, very good.
It was like theory in motion. That's how I thought about it as we were doing it. How can we present theory in motion?
And still express ourselves as, you know, who we are, but somehow find that connection to come together and make sense, hopefully.
And again, collaboration among counselors. I mean, that's another part that was huge that we became kind of really familiar with, and a part that feeding off of each other, off of each other's energy, and just really loving and enjoying that.
We have a comment in the chat from Desireen. Thank you for the presentation, very creative. Where are you both in the program?
We are both second year students, right? Wow.
In statistics.
We're in statistics, having fun right now with Dr. Foster. Or assessments, sorry, not statistics.
I mean, assessments, yeah.
You know, if I could just share something really quick, I have been so inspired in terms of creativity from students. Like, I've had students who have come up with like really creative techniques, just allowing themselves to free themselves from things that hold them back, that idea that they can't. Like, I had a student once, which I think is a great idea. She created a book of it was kind of like, she called it her bubble book because it was just pictures of people that were like having a conversation, so sort of like a cartoon strip. And then she would just leave blank bubbles above their head, and then she'd have, her clients fill them in. So like if she were dealing with adolescence, and they could tell their story through these pictures of books. And I thought that was a very creative way for her to be able to kind of share her art and allow someone that may not be able to speak the words to share it through a story. So yeah, and then I had another student that I also thought this is another one of those creative ideas that really stuck with me. Who she saved old tissue boxes and she created walls in her counseling session. So she would stack her tissue boxes up as if they were blocks. And she would block the client in and she would say things to them like, how can we break down this wall? Like, what do we have to do to move this one brick? And so it was very visual for them and it was very meaningful. And it was just something simple that, that didn't take a lot, but it allowed her to kind of be expressive and the client to gain so much from that experience.
That's a great example. Thank you, Dr. Hudson, for sharing. And also, I want to thank you, Dr. Hudson, for kind of pushing or shoving me into the direction of really looking at how I can incorporate my photography, because I think it's really it's been great. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
Anybody else have any questions?
Well, let me just say this, and then I'll be quiet, and you can chat. But I just want to say that both of you are so talented, and I really appreciate the originality that you bring to your work as students, and then also to what you'll be doing as counselors. So I'm very proud of you, and I'm glad that I have had the opportunity to kind of be a part of your process.
Oh, I'm very happy that you've been part of our process as well. Absolutely.
For sure. And we're glad all of you are here with us. I really appreciate it. My last presentation, I had 2 people, so this is great.
Well, now we have 54, so I was like, oh no. Does anybody else have any more questions?
Dr. Rush Wilson put in the chat, Theory in Motion may be the name of the textbook the two of you write.
Oh, wow.
I love that.
I like that too. That's awesome.
I want an autographed copy.
Wow. Thank you guys so much. It's very nice.
Great job, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Questions?
Oh yeah, Dr. Rush Wilson said me too. She wants a copy too.
Okay.
An autographed copy too.
No problem.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it for us then. But really, many thanks for coming and sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this experience with Susie and I, and for the support, for the collaboration.
Definitely the support.
As well.
Yeah, agreed. I really am really grateful for the support.
Okay. All right, Ken, if you could type your last name in the chat so I can make sure that you get credit for being here, that would be great. And then the next presentation is A New Age of Coming Out, and so that'll start at 4, so you guys got a little bit of time to take a break before you come back for the next presentation. 4 o'clock my time, I'm sorry, 3 o'clock Central.